those of you who may be new to SNAP and Alberta Printmakers, my name is Michelle Wiebe, and I'm Alberta Printmakers Interim Executive Director. Our regular Executive Director, Tracy Wormsbecker, is on maternity leave, and she'll be coming back at the beginning of October. I'm delighted to be hosting our event this evening. I want to welcome Amanda McKenzie, SNAP's Print Shop and Programs Coordinator, who's also hosting and collaborating on this program. She's going to be our behind the scenes tech person tonight. So her job is going to be madly switching cameras and cutting, pasting things into the chat for everybody with links and things as we need them. So thank you for joining us for our second program of this year's Prairie Impressions. And this is our second time doing Prairie Impressions. If you're not familiar with SNAP or AP, we're both artist-run nonprofit organizations in Edmonton and Calgary. Our organizations have been around since 1982 for SNAP and 1989 for AP. Both of our organizations have a gallery and print shop where we focus on providing access and facilities to artists, as well as educational and outreach opportunities for the community. We have a number of exciting programs and events that may be of interest, which we will share the links to shortly in the chat. As you can see, the chat is lighting up down below. That's just all these links that I'm referring to. You will get a copy of the chat later, I believe. And you can also click on things as you like. We've partnered together again for this event for a second year in a row to celebrate Alberta Culture Days and to showcase Alberta print artists. We are thrilled to be bringing this event back this year with the support and generous funding from Alberta Culture Days and the Government of Alberta. We have planned some exciting programs for the next few weeks that we hope you'll be able to join and enjoy. This year, we have added in a postcard theme to connect everyone joining across Alberta so we can create and print together and then share our work online by mailing printed postcards to our friends and family. Tonight, you will be hearing from a Lethbridge-based artist, Kellen Spencer, who will be showing you all of his printmaking, all of the printmaking processes tonight. No pressure. And as well as demonstrating a variety of mark making and talio techniques for his Prairie Impressions postcards. On Saturday, September 18th, we have our interactive print party with Calgary-based printmaker Christina Krentz and Mexico-born and Edmonton-based Gina Passaran, giving exciting demonstrations for you to follow along with and print your postcards at home. You can register for this program still, and we will add the links shortly. If you miss out on any of the sessions, you can watch on both AP's and SNAP's YouTube channels for the rest of the month. Last week's presentation from Edmonton-based Mike and McDowell is available soon for viewing there as well. We also encourage everyone to print their postcards and share them with us using the hashtag Prairie Impressions hashtag so that we can feature them on our online postcard showcase from September 21st to 30th. And you'll see some links popping up for that. Now, before we go any further with this, I'd just like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. SNAP is on the traditional lands currently referred to as Treaty 6 territory, and AP is situated on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region. Both the City of Calgary and the City of Edmonton and all people here are the intended beneficiaries of peace and friendship treaties. Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous First Nations as well as the Métis people who have called this area home since time immemorial. SNAP and AP are dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 is honored and respected through our governance, our values, and most importantly, in our relations with artists and within our community. In addition to this, as this program is online, we may have others joining from other unceded traditional lands and treaty territories, and we wish to extend our respect and welcome to everyone. Now, we'll get started shortly, but first we'll be going through some housekeeping. When you registered, you received information that covers both SNAP and AP's terms for participating. Please take a peek at that if you have not already, as we want to make this a fun, welcoming, and inclusive place for all. We will be recording this session for accessibility measures and to share the presentation and demonstrations for the rest of Alberta Culture Days celebrations for the remainder of this month. We'll be removing and editing any participants from the recording and just have the presenting artists and be the focus. So please feel free to keep your video on, as it's nice to see everyone's faces, but also feel free to turn your video off if preferred. Please keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. During the discussion period, please feel free to unmute when you want to say something and then mute when someone else is speaking. As there are a number of us in attendance, please keep your comments and feedback to a timely length so everyone who would like to speak has the opportunity. We will happily pass along your questions or comments for the presenter if you would like to share at a later date. If you do not have a microphone or are not comfortable speaking, feel free to type questions in the chat, and that'll be down on the bottom of your screen there, and I can read them out. There are also reaction emojis to interact during the presentation. If you'd like to, you can raise your hand during the discussion period if there's a queue of other participants asking questions or commenting. You can also message me or Amanda if you have any technical issues, questions, or concerns at any point. So you can do that through the chat. You don't have to message everyone. You can just pick my profile name, Alberta Printmakers, or Amanda's. It says Amanda in brackets, she, her up there. So feel free to do that at any point in time. If you're having technical or video connection issues, you may want to consider using the Zoom app rather than the browser, as it has a stronger connection. You may also want to limit streaming and downloading at this time too, and mention that to your housemates so that you can enjoy the presentation fully. Closed captioning is available and can be accessed through the CC button at the bottom here. You can turn on or off the subtitles as you would like. You can change the display name on your video screen as well, and I encourage you to add your pronouns if you'd like. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Kellen Spencer, who is tonight's presenting artist for Prairie Impressions. Meet the artist. I'll read out Kellen's bio for you. Kellen Spencer is a Lethbridge-based visual artist and printmaker whose practice examines the connection between residential development, memory, and the notion of home. By documenting changes in the residential landscape through photography and etching, Kellen sees the home as a place to unearth past memories while questioning future cycles of construction and gentrification. In 2018, he completed a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Print Media at the Alberta College of Art and Design, presently AU Arts, and was the recipient of the Board of Governors Graduating Student Award. His printed works have been included in group exhibitions at the New Gallery, Vivian Art, and the Arilla Museum of Art and History. Kellen currently works full-time in construction as a survey crew lead and CAD technician while maintaining his art practice out of his garage studio, which you will see tonight, and the printmaking facilities at is it CASA?
CASA, yes.
Yes, CASA at Lethbridge. Anyways. One other thing, Kellen is also a former board member at Alberta Printmakers and a friend still, so we're just delighted to be able to partner with him on tonight's presentation. So with that, I will turn this whole show over to Kellen, and he will walk you through his art and his practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I also just wanted to say a big thank you to you guys for being here tonight, and for Amanda and Michelle's work on these events. Of course, my speaking tonight isn't the only event. If you had the chance to see Mike in last week, I didn't myself, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the recording. So keep your eye out if you missed it as well. And yeah, I was really pleased when I got the invitation to speak. It's one of the first times actually that I'm giving an artist talk, and it's interesting doing it via Zoom because it's both casual and formal to speak about your own work. So I'm excited to do that. So I figured what I would do to get started is actually just speak a little bit more about my personal background, what it is that I do, where I've come from, and how it relates to the prints that I make now. So I'm just going to change my screens and share some slides with you. So as Michelle mentioned, I'm a Lethbridge-based artist. It's where I currently live, but it's also where I was born and grew up. Lethbridge is quite an interesting city for its landscapes and architecture. The picture that I'm showing here is, of course, of the high-level bridge. So if you're familiar with the city, it's kind of a sight to behold, but something that I think we kind of take for granted at times living here. It's both in your face and kind of easily forgotten. And for me, growing up in Lethbridge and seeing this bridge for years and years, I think had sort of an maybe subconscious level or a sort of indirect impact on my interest now in my art practice in the built environment and the landscape. And so I thought it'd be interesting just to share a couple of facts about the high-level bridge. It's said to be the tallest and longest trestle bridge of its kind, which is to say there's some that are longer and some that are taller, but none that are as tall and as long, which I always thought was a curious fact. It stands at about 96 meters high and just over 1.6 kilometers long, which is a pretty incredible prairie impression, you could say, especially considering it was built in the early 1900s, between 1908 and 1909. And it was built in just 10 months, which from my perspective, working in construction is pretty incredible. I've worked on some projects during my day job that have taken multiple years and are nothing to the size and scale of the high-level bridge. So I'll just move ahead to the next slide, which is an image of the construction in the winter 1909. And you can get a sense of the footprint that it has in the Oldman River Valley and the scale of the bridge as it's being constructed. Sorry, I'm just going to stay here for one more moment. The bridge, of course, was built by the CP Rail and is still used today as a form of, rail transport. The river bottom itself, every decade or so, will tend to flood, and I think there have been one, if not two or three occasions where the Whoop Up Drive Bridge, which is a bridge for cars, has been closed, and the rail cars transporting passengers were kind of the only way for citizens of Lethbridge, emergency workers and public workers, to get across. My mom's actually here in this Zoom call tonight, and I think that in the early 90s, she was one of them working at the hospital who got the chance to take a train across the bridge, which is an aside, but I thought kind of an interesting thing to note. So jumping ahead to 2010, I had graduated from high school and moved from Lethbridge. And during the 5 years that followed, I lived in 9 different cities. So if you were to average that, it would be about as if you're moving every 6.5 months, which for me was at the time very exciting, but also quite disorienting. And the reasons that I had moved were primarily for school, for work, and for a volunteering program called Katimavik. So 2015 was the year that I moved to Calgary to finish my degree at ACAD, which is now AU Arts. And it was there that my interest in the topic of home kind of came about. But I wanted to share this slide because I think it relates closely to the questions that I have about home and where it is that we call home and why. So during the same period of time, between 2012 and 2016, I also worked as a tree planter in the summer times. So not only moving 9 times over the course of 5 years between like physical buildings. During the summertime, I was also moving between temporary bush camps while tree planting. So this is a photograph of my tent near Burns Lake in 2014. It looks like it's kind of a desolate and lonely location, but tree planting for me is actually a very fond memory for the friends and the community that I was able to develop during that time, and share quite a unique work experience with those people. So moving further ahead yet to the work that I'm doing now, that is separate from my art practice, but as you'll see, closely related. I work as a surveyor in Lethbridge and surrounding area. I've had the privilege of being able to work in construction and in this job because my dad is a surveyor and has been for 30 plus years, I would say. And so I've been working for his business in Lethbridge, most recently following the time that I had graduated from ACAD in Calgary in 2018, moving to Lethbridge and working full-time for his company since. So this image was just taken a few weeks ago, and it's of a concrete footing of the Coaldale Civic Center, just to the east of Lethbridge. So the survey instrument that you see on the right of the frame is fairly typical of surveying. It uses basically a laser to determine an angle and a distance to a point. And so we were making precise marks on the footing of the concrete for building grid lines that they can use to measure where the walls are going to be placed and where different supports are going to be placed along the foundation. So that's kind of a bit more about me and what I do besides my art practice. And yeah, I think that's the last slide. Actually, I did throw this one in. This is my coworker, James, and I at the landfill. He's got a bucket on his head, and it was a pretty funny moment because we often find ourselves sort of disoriented at the landfill because it's not skewed, or it's not sort of located north-south. So sometimes at the landfill, when we're working there, we have difficulty finding north. So I thought, this was a good example of James struggling to find his direction. All right, so from here, I'm actually just going to flip around and share some images, some physical prints rather than more slides. Being in this studio space itself, I figured it would be nice to see some physical prints instead of just slides. So I'm just going to take a second. I'll turn my video off for one moment, and then I'll be back on, flipped around. All right, I just want to make sure that you can all still hear me okay. Is the audio still okay? Yeah, great. So living in Calgary, just going to move this up a little bit so that I'm not just showing the lower half of my body. So living in Calgary was where like I said, I really became interested in the topic of home in my art practice. At the time, while attending ACAD, was renting from my grandmother. She lives in a small duplex in Mount Pleasant, which is just north of the SAIT and AU Arts campus. And she's been living there since the early to mid 50s, I believe. During which time she has also been a landlord, so seeing many tenants come and go, and lots of change in the neighborhood as well. So when I was living there, I started to notice and also remember some familiar alleyways, locations that I had seen, locations in the park nearby that I sort of had memories of growing up, visiting her as a child, and in the neighborhood itself, noticing quite a few differences in the houses that were present. As anyone in Calgary would know, it is starting to undergo a lot more redevelopment, and the inner city neighborhoods are seeing quite a few infills being built. So the development in my grandmother's neighborhood sparked a lot of interest for me, and I started taking photographs to document the sort of redevelopment process playing out. And so I'll share some of those photographs. So I hope the glare on these isn't too bad. They're in frames because I had shown them in a small exhibition previous. But this is an image of a side door to what I believe is a secondary suite in a small bungalow home. This is another sort of bungalow in Mount Pleasant. I was really interested in the shadow of the tree on the side of this house, and sort of the impression that it leaves in the image. And then taking photographs as well of sites that are under construction. So of course, this is a lot where a house has been torn down. There's some excavation taking place, so there's a stockpile here, and the image is sort of superimposed by a chain link fence around the perimeter of the property. And then yet another of a newer infill home being constructed. So thinking about in the neighborhood, the contrast then between these older post-war single-family bungalows that typically range from 750 to 1,500 square feet, relatively small homes, contrasted by much larger infills that are also often meant to be single-family homes, and are really more like investments in assets than they are homes in some respects. Canada is one of many countries that is having a sort of crisis with its housing, and the prices of homes as well becoming less and less accessible to younger generations and new people to Canada as well. And so seeing the sort of contrast then between the generational gap is something that I was very frequently reminded of living with my grandma and talking to her as well about the neighborhood and how it was changing. So with these photographs, I was really at the time looking, I was using them as a way to document this process playing out, but didn't necessarily give too much thought just yet about what that meant to me. And so in, I guess it was my last year at ACAD, I started a series of etchings that referenced the photographs and was very much in the same style and followed the same sort of concept of construction and change in the residential landscape. So this was the first image that I made, and it's titled "Sitting, Waiting," of a small house that's sort of nestled in amongst some mature trees. And I was quite interested at the time in mark making, and I'll hold this a little bit closer so that you can see the painterly brush strokes and marks that I made in the foreground to sort of frame the house as almost more of a memory or a cloud kind of structure, something that is a little bit less grounded than, of course, we see than we see in person and in reality. So this is another image, an etching of an empty lot. The title of this is "Conflict Over Easements." So starting to think about as well the process and the conflict between the people who are currently living in these homes and developers who are interested in building new homes. It was quite interesting to live with my grandma. We would often see realtors or developers driving around in the neighborhood, scouting out houses that were potentially for sale or coming close to sale, and looking at them through the lens of investment. And for me, it was difficult to see that that process playing out because I was growing closer with my grandmother, and she and her two sisters are all in their mid to late 90s. So thinking about age and passing and sort of this turning over of home and place So this was the next image in this series of etchings titled On a Cracked Foundation. And the title, of course, speaks to the sort of fragility of age, both in the physical structure of a home that may soon be demolished or rebuilt, and the fragility of our experience of home. So at that point, I was starting, really to think more about the connection that we have to the places that we live, and how that can often be very sentimental. Yet another empty lot. This is titled For Sale. So there's a construction fence around it, and it's kind of waiting again to be for something new to take its place. This image is titled Turning the Soil, and it's quite a dark etching. Technically, I think it was one that I struggled with more than the others. The trees in the background make it difficult to see this excavator digging, but in the foreground, of course, there is a new foundation being dug and constructed. So again, just kind of documenting this process rather than through photography, just looking at it through etching. And then the last image in the series, titled A Pile of Dirt, is, of course, sort of the material that has been excavated and another stage in sort of the building process. And the site in this image is quite messy and disorderly, and that was something that really captured my interest in seeing properties under construction, with fences falling over and offcuts of lumber being piled around, and just thinking about all of the material involved in this turning over from one generation of home to the next. So the following semester, and it was still during my time at ACAD in 2018, I started to incorporate some surreal elements into my etchings that were meant to convey more memory and imagination in the sites that I was etching. So of course, in this image, there's a clock on the wall in this sort of empty frame structure, and the chair in the foreground is actually a sort of faux suede red chair that my grandma has in her home, and I always remember sitting on. So in this image, I'm kind of deconstructing the home and taking these elements outside the home where they wouldn't normally be, and just kind of playing with the idea of separation and moving on. So similarly, in this image, there's sort of a change in realistic space. There isn't, a clearly defined home in this image, but there are traces of it, like sort of the hardwood floor, these beds opposite one another with kind of an unusual translucent wall. And the sort of open door to the right. Starting, I guess, to think about physical features of the home as symbols. So windows and doors are something that have become of interest to me for their symbolism. In describing opportunity, sort of as a threshold that you may be passing through in the past, present, or future, and also the idea of closing a door and bringing closure to a particular time period. So this is another image in the series, and as you can see from the first ones that I showed you, I have started to work a little bit larger, which technically is a bit more challenging, and I think for me as a printmaker, just been a really good way to challenge myself with the images that I'm working on, but also allow a little bit more freedom in the types of images that you can make. Sometimes working on a really small copper plate can be restrictive. So I was fortunate to make some larger images. And this is of, again, large sort of waste pile or stockpile from an excavated site. And in the background, you can see there's some dotted lines sort of indicating a blueprint or something that is yet to be built, and perhaps kind of a more monolithic structure than the bungalows, the small single-family homes that I've been looking at in my photographs in previous sections. So a little larger yet, I have to stand back for this one, but this is larger etching of the top half of this frame being lifted onto the other. And there's sort of a precarity to the beams that the frame is being hoisted from, and the walls aren't quite complete. There's very few studs, and the frame itself is quite fragile. So I was just trying to use those elements to convey the sort of fragility and the I suppose just the fragility of the way that I was feeling about the process of redevelopment playing out in my grandmother's neighborhood. So jumping ahead a little bit more to the work that I am making now, it's very much a direct extension of the work that I made at ACAD in 2018. So there were a few years since where my art practice was really inactive, focusing on work, surveying in Lethbridge. And of course, with the COVID pandemic, it was more difficult to be productive in my art practice. But last year, I was fortunate enough to receive a grant from the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and the art production stream. So I had proposed to create 12 large, 16 by 20 inch copper plate etchings. And so I'll just share a few of the resulting images of those. The the work is still in process, so I have more prints to complete just yet, but these are a few of the first images. So this is actually a print speaking to the process a little bit more. This is just on washi paper, so you can see the print itself is very thin, and the edges of the paper I've cut. This is kitakata or awagami kitakata paper. So it did have deckled edges previously, but I've cut them square with the intention to mount them onto a support, just arches white paper, like I have my previous etchings. So yeah, these have all been shinkolayed onto these supports. And actually Maiken had done her demo on Shinkolay, so if that's something you're interested in, definitely watch the recording of her presentation. Here's another etching that I completed recently, and again referencing this door in sort of an empty space. This rain barrel on top of a pallet in the corner is kind of uncanny or like misplaced. It's just something that I remember having seen in a particular lot in Calgary, and then more recently was reminded of it with the rain barrel that I have here in the garage. I can show you that later. And this is another image yet. The foundation in sort of the foreground is rising up into space and backward into the sort of horizon of the image in a way that is quite unusual, and of course not at all like a foundation for any building would be built in reality. So I'm starting to play a little bit more in my images with space and thinking about the spatiality of a home, and you know, being a little bit less specific with the elements that make it even recognizable as a home place. So this image is new enough to me that I haven't quite found the context or place for it yet in my work, but it's perhaps one of the most sort of desolate images that I have created to date. And I think that is largely in part to living in Lethbridge again and seeing the prairies more frequently. When I'm working, we're often driving 1 to 3 hours outside of Lethbridge to construction sites. So I spend a lot of time through my work just looking at empty prairie, and my images, I think, are becoming more flat because of it. All right, so I'm going to flip around one more time, and I think from there, just a second. Yeah, I guess maybe I won't flip around right now, just for the difficulty of moving. And I think it's actually a good time just to take a 5-minute break. Um, I'm not sure if Michelle mentioned it in the beginning, but I think the second part of the presentation that I'd like to share is a studio tour of the space that I have behind me, and then a demo where I'll share some of the mark making techniques that I use in my etchings. So yeah, if everyone wants to relax for a few minutes, we'll come back, I guess.
Before you put your pause on there, Kellen,
Yeah.
we had one very interesting question in the chat.
Sure. Yes.
So we'll just take a second here just to ask you that. Kate wanted to know if you could speak about the various techniques used in the first series of etching done at AU Arts.
Okay. Sorry, just thinking about questions in general. If there are any other questions now, maybe would be a good time before the little studio tour and demo. So if anyone else has any others, feel free to drop them in the chat. But yes, to answer your question, Kate, thank you and hello. I'm glad that you're able to make it. And yeah, the process in the first prints that I shared, all of the images that I've shown are copperplate etchings. So I tend to start with a location that I'm interested in, or an idea that I'm interested in, and use that as a reference to create a drawing. I'll usually draw in pencil beforehand, before doing any work on copper, and just to get a sense of the composition that I want to create. And then the etchings themselves are quite simple. I don't use too many sophisticated techniques. Particularly, I'm just using hard ground line work and Aquatint. I just use a spray paint Aquatint, and typically I'm etching 3 to 6 steps. So for those of you who are less familiar with printmaking, in order to achieve different values, you will etch the copper plate longer. So the area that I'm pointing at in this image in the foreground was likely only etched for maybe 15 seconds to 30 seconds, whereas the darker values were likely etched for several minutes, or up to even 20 or 30. Aquatint, more to that for those who are less familiar, is basically a way to create a fine dot pattern across the surface of your copper, and each of the dots on the surface acts as a resist to the ferric chloride, which is kind of the most typical etchant for copper. And yeah, Aquatint is basically just a simple way to achieve large areas of value rather than lines. I think this line, for example, is actually just drawn as a dry point line, or as a thicker hard ground line. Like I had said before, Kate, I also tend to print on washi paper and then Shinkle the images afterward. And the reason being is just the level of detail that you can achieve on the handmade paper. Cotton rag paper, I have often just had difficulties printing on, and then wasting a lot more paper because my proofs don't turn out necessarily the way that I want them to. I think if I were to print more often on rag paper, I would have to look around for a bit more help, because I've just gotten kind of into a routine of using really nice papers. It's hard to go back once you have started using washi paper. So I hope that answers your question. I guess another thing.
Sorry, just wanted to ask, that was excellent. Thank you for so much detail, Kellen. That's excellent. I just was curious whether you you must use a variety of brushes. Do you ever use sugar lift or anything like that, or is it directly painting with your stop out?
I haven't used sugar lift. Occasionally I will use spit bite, and I tend to use it partway through the Aquatint resist. I just stop out with asphaltum, so I'm not printing or etching in a non-toxic way, like I know you are very interested in. But yes, I use spit bite occasionally, and I also, rather than just using a scribe and brushes, I also do use occasionally Sharpie and an oil-based paint marker.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Okay, Matt, we have, or Matt, Matt's my assistant here. Kellen, Rosemary, we have a couple or two questions in the chat. And just to keep our eyes on the time with the 5-minute break, we are at 7:25 right now. So just so that you have an indication of how long you need for your presentation. Rosemary wanted to know, did you use stop out over the light areas?
Yes, exactly. So all of the white that you see would have been stopped out in this image before doing any etching. The lighter value in the foreground is, I guess, actually a good example of where I would have used a little bit of spit bite to create some variation, some darker values closer to the house and some lighter values closer to the frame.
Awesome. Okay, and then we have one other question in the chat from Matt. You started with black and white photography and then moved to etching. What do you feel you can achieve with your etchings that you couldn't with just photography? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think one that I am sort of challenged by, because a photograph is kind of objective, and what I'm looking at in terms of documenting is sort of the objectivity, I guess, of this process. I think the reason that I became interested and more focused on etching is because of the process involved. For one, I enjoy the process. It's longer and drawn out, so that gives me more time to think about what it is that I'm making. The process is kind of more akin to the ideas that I'm working with as well. For many printmakers, I think that the sort of just tension between impressing two surfaces together, revealing a print, is just really quite satisfying, and I think can also speak to the ideas that I'm working with of change, separation, and I guess development. Like the process of construction is not dissimilar to etching in that you start with a plan, you make some marks, you use chemicals and sort of make a mess throughout the process until you have something that is complete. So just conceptually for me, that kind of mirrors the ideas that I'm working with. And whether or not that's conveyed to the viewer, I'm not sure. But for me, it's something that I have started to think about more.
Excellent. So I think that's it for questions. Why don't we do our 5-minute break so that Kellen just needs to reset his cameras. And this is your chance as an audience that if you need to go and grab a beverage or go to the washroom or anything like that, you'll have enough time to do that.
All right. So this is my studio space at home. I'm very fortunate to have this garage space, which is very large and a space that I was able to sort of transform from just a family storage space into my studio. I rent is owned by her, so I've been renting from her and able to use this garage. When I moved here in 2018, the space was uninsulated and unheated. There were no walls up, and it was full of just family storage, so it was difficult to actually work in here. But yeah, over the past 3 years, I've made it functional. I would say 6 to 8 months that I've been able to actually use it. This is, of course, a print rack that I purchased in Calgary from Clinton St. John, who's a musician. And I'm not sure if he was involved with Burnt Toast Studio or just screen printing on his own. But he had this massive rack in his home, and I was able to purchase it from him for just a couple $100. So it's hard to say no, despite its size.
You're cutting out a little bit.
And of course, I cannot make enough prints on my own to use it. Okay. Just one moment, I'll switch my microphone. Sorry about that. You should be able to hear me a little better now.
Yeah. I think your connection's a little dodgy on your phone right now.
Yes, it was really good the other day, so sorry about this, everyone. I think I'll actually have to just stand here, unfortunately, because I can't move from the microphone on my computer. But I'll just point a few things out and make this a little quicker. So yeah, I received and purchased this print rack in Calgary before moving to Lethbridge. And like I said, I could not print enough to use it all myself. So I'm looking forward to a time where I can share this space with others. I also was able to acquire a press, and the timing of it was really lucky. When I graduated from ACAD in 2018, they were selling one of their etching presses, and I inquired as soon as I could, and was fortunate enough to move it down to Lethbridge, knowing that I was able to use this space. So you can see it in the corner here. I'm sorry I can't get closer. It's a graphic Sturgis etching press, and the size of the bed is, I believe, 32 by 60 inches. So I'm able to print quite large using it. And then left of that, I have some table space and a little space where I often place my computer and use an inkjet printer. Inkjet prints, or digital printing, I should say, is something that I intend to incorporate into my artwork more in the future. Yeah, I guess that's something that I'm excited about, and you could keep your eye out for in the future. Left of that yet, built some large shelving just to store. Over here I have quite a few art supplies, portfolios, paper, etc. And then just household storage, winter clothes, Christmas trees, etc. So I think that's all I'll say about the studio space. And from here, I guess I'll just move my phone and we can do a brief demo as well. I'll be talking about some mark making tonight. All right, thanks for your patience. I just turned off my cell phone altogether because of the bad connection. So I hope that you can hear me a little bit better now and the picture is clear.
It's great. It's just perfect.
So I thought what I would share with you tonight, leading up to the postcard that I printed for this event, is just some mark making techniques that I use in my etchings. It's something that I really enjoy, and further to your question, Matt, I like being able to use different materials, brushes, scribes, some household items, rather than just a camera. I think that's largely why I make etchings instead of just photographs. So I've prepared just a few different copper plates that are kind of meant for different stages of the process. This copper plate is blank. It's just been polished, cleaned, and degreased. This one has a hard ground resist on the surface. And the resist that I'm using is just Graphic Chemicals Universal hard ground. And this plate has an Aquatint, a spray paint Aquatint on the surface, and some hard ground lines etched as well. So the tools that I tend to use are a burnisher. This is a roulette. It's quite fine, and I've had difficulties using this one, so I don't use it very often. But much more often, just the most simple tool of them all is a pointed awl or scrub and a scraper. Oddly enough, I only use and have really been using these two brushes for all of the etchings that I've made. I guess I'm just partial to sort of simplicity of these flat brushes. I haven't branched out too much there. And then two other resists that I use for making marks are Sharpie and an oil-based paint marker, which is also by or made by Sharpie's brand. A few other tools that I pulled for today's demo was just a pipe cleaner. It's got twisted sort of a twisted metal handle on it, which I bent into this shape to use as a tool. This is a cat brush, and so it's got quite a few sort of metal hooks on it that I haven't used yet, but I thought would be a kind of an interesting thing to use in some future prints and for this demo. So thinking about mark making at each stage of the etching process, of course, etching onto a blank surface, making marks with any tool will result in what's called dry point line, and you're just creating a burr on the surface. When I'm making any type of mark, I try to be quite loose with my lines and not necessarily too particular about the straightness of a line. So when you're making a dry point line, you have to exert, significant amount more force, and the tools that you use may not slide across the surface quite as nice as they would on a hard ground surface. But I like being able to incorporate marks at different stages, sort of to be able to add to the image rather than making marks at every different stage, or rather than making marks at one stage and calling it complete. It's nice to have the freedom to make marks throughout the process. So it's quite difficult to see, but here's just a few really small marks on the surface. Sometimes I will just start with some marks that later look incidental in the prints, just to kind of map out the composition. So my prints tend to look a little bit dirty or messy because I'm not too concerned about a perfectly mark-free background or negative space. Marking on hard ground is of course much smoother compared to the dry point surface on a blank plate, and that's where I guess I really enjoy just the loose mark making process, and being able to sort of quickly draw out what it is that I intend to etch. So again, of course, for those of you, I know there may be a few who are less familiar with printmaking. I think my mom's here tonight. The lines that I have just made will be etched in the acid, and everything that is still black or that has the hard ground on it will be resistant to the ferric chloride etch. So I'll just give you an example of a few different tools. So this pipe cleaner, I can kind of make multiple lines at the same time, and they become kind of messier and less controlled than they would with a scribe. and less deep as well in this case. I'm going to actually just try this tap brush for the first time. The reason that I brought it out is because I think it's useful to try using tools that are less common and that you might find laying around your house. It's something that I suppose I aspire to do more of. Yeah, and in this case, it's making kind of 2 lines at a time. So the hooks are not even. You can then quickly make some different lines.
Kellen, Rosemary wants to know if you also do Mezzotint.
No, I do not. I've been looking at purchasing a Mezzotint rocker, but haven't done so just yet. So for me, the stage of using hard ground is really the first stage in the process of making my prints. I use the line work kind of as key to the rest of the image. So where more of the work happens is actually at the Aquatint stage. And that's when I kind of use what I guess I consider to be like a dry brush sort of technique, similar to like dry brushing in watercolor. This is an image that I have printed for the postcard. So you can see in the foreground, there's these brush stroke kind of marks. And so those marks are what I'm making at this stage of the process. Where I have sprayed a spray paint Aquatint onto the surface and started to use a liquid ground, in this case, asphaltum. So I'll use a little bit of that right now just to kind of show you how I kind of achieve a dry brush effect. I'll use a smaller brush. I have this glass jar. Not necessarily a good idea to keep toxic chemicals in glass, but it's one of the rules that I've broken in my practice. And of course, having some exhaust is really important. I don't have any today. It's one of the things that I miss or I'm lacking in my studio, which is why I use the facilities at CASA that have ferric chloride, running water, and of course some exhaust. But the reason that I keep a jar, I kind of just keep adding to it with each use, and I let it dry out partly so that it's not as fluid. And by doing that, it becomes more viscous, and I can easily, more easily create sort of a dry brush effect. So usually I'll just take kind of a dab of the asphaltum. I'll dab it on the surface until I have less on the tip of the brush, and then I'll start to stop out the image, kind of working from these negative spaces that I want to stop out toward areas that are going to be darker and etched for a longer period of time. I'm usually kind of linear at this first stage with the marks that I make, and then more particular as the print progresses. And that's when I also start to use a Sharpie or a paint marker to make more sort of precise and specific marks and to stop out areas that are smaller. So you can kind of see in the foreground of this image, I'm just kind of making, stopping out these foreground areas that I know I want to keep white. And so with each step in the acid, I'll continue to make these same type of marks. That way, I guess I'm able to achieve some more variation in the values. So these marks in the foreground were, for the most part, made all the same way, and they kind of almost look like spit by, but they are just simple Aquatint marks that have been etched for just a specific amount of time. I guess, yeah, sort of moving on, I realize there's not a whole lot of time left. I'll just point out a few other marks that you can see in this image that have come from Sharpie and oil-based paint marker. So these marks in sort of the foreground here that are a little lighter were just hatched with a Sharpie marker. Same with this sort of outline around what could be a rock, and the edges of the house here as well that act as highlights. So different kinds of marks for different purposes. I will often burnish the finished etched surface to create highlights as well. In this etching, I would have burnished the roof to give it a little bit of contrast from this green elevator in the background. And yeah, similarly with the Sharpie, if you haven't used it before, you can just draw directly onto the surface, and it will resist the ferric chloride, which is quite nice because compared to using liquid, resist the consistency and sort of the flow of ink out of the marker is really smooth and more predictable. Whereas when I'm using a sort of dry brush effect, there's a little bit less control, and it's simply less precise. One thing I'll say as well about using either of these products, they are more difficult to clean from the plate after the fact, and typically you would use acetone to do that, which again is something that you definitely need an exhaust hood or a respirator at the very least to be using safely in the studio. Yeah, I guess because of time, I won't share too much more, but I will, I guess, show you the finished print. This, or finished postcard, I should say. This is one that has not been mounted onto a postcard yet, but this is the postcard that was designed. Michelle, will you remind me who designed the?
It was the lovely Allison Frank.
Yes, I thought it was Allison. So the back of the postcard in this case, I've just printed out on an inkjet printer, and I will shinkolay this image onto the reverse. So I actually printed 6 of these. So if any of you would like to receive one in the mail, drop, I guess, your name and email into the chat box, and I'll send out a brief email to receive your address and send one away for you. And I'll also send, of course, one to you, Michelle and Amanda at AP and Snap as well. So.
Excellent. So if you end up not catching Kellen's contact information, you can also contact myself or Amanda at SNAP and Alberta Printmakers, and we can forward any of those requests directly to Kellen as well. Let's see where we're at. Oh, we've got a few minutes left. First of all, thank you very much, Kellen, for rolling with the punches on technological mishaps. That can be a little rattling, so you did great.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned with the change in the microphones is that like the closed captioning, they do not understand printmaking. It was bananas. So that's a good read later on. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this, Kellen? Or if there's any questions, this might be a good time to throw those in the chat or raise your hand on your display.
Sure. Yeah, if there are any other questions, definitely drop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer anything else. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a while since I've had the chance to speak about my practice, and sorry, just need to make sure this is still plugged in so I don't lose you. But yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and to share some of what I do with you guys. So thanks so much.
Well, we did have something in the chat that came up to say that Rosemary was excited about learning about Sharpie markers as a resist. So that was an awesome tip. For those of you that didn't catch it in the chat as well, you can follow Kellen on Instagram. His handle there is @KellenSP, and is there an underscore at the end?
Yes.
With an underscore at the end. He also has a website, which is www.kellenspencer.com. And then I see something here that is a city dream space that I think it's a link that Amanda's throwing into the chat as well. Yeah, so unless there's any last minute questions here, I just want to thank you on behalf of SNAP and Alberta Printmakers for just sharing not only your practice, but your very well-equipped studio, which I think everybody was a little bit jealous to see that a massive drawing rack and amazing press. And we just wish you the best. It's been so neat to see your practice change and develop as you've moved further away from Calgary. And it's exciting to know too that there's a bit of a printmaking community coming together further south from us as well, because as everybody here knows, printmakers are few and far between, it seems sometimes. So it's always nice to see a growing little community come together. So I'm very happy that you're a part of that.
Yeah, and actually something that I will say, I feel like overly privileged to have as much space as I do here in Lethbridge. And this is the first time that I've showing it publicly. I haven't posted pictures or anything on my Instagram, but one of my sort of intentions with this space as well is for other people to use it. To date, just one of my friends, Katie Allard, who is also a student at ACAD in printmaking, did some screen printing in here, and it was really nice to have someone to share the space with a little bit and know that it was being used. So quite honestly, if there's any interest from printmakers in Calgary, Edmonton, or pass the word along to people you may know in Lethbridge, that if they're looking for a little bit of space to use, or even do like a self-directed week-long residency or something like that, shoot me a message, and I'd love to chat about sharing the space in any way that I can. So
that's amazing. So they can pull up with their camper.
Yeah.
Come have a printmaking weekend. It would be fabulous. Yep, in the wild streets of Lethbridge. So you heard it here first. Kellen he will be applying for grants and everything else next thing you know it. So anyways, this was an excellent evening, and we are just so thankful to have you in our print community. And if anybody has any further questions, feel free to reach out to Amanda or myself, and we would be happy to either give you an answer or direct you to the source, probably Kellen. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight and just being supporters of the arts, especially printmaking. And we look forward to seeing you at more of our events, especially this Saturday, our print party. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please feel free to check out the links or go onto our websites and we can take it from there. Anything else, Amanda?
No, that's everything. I just want to say thank you as well. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, we'll end the meeting and you're all free to go. Take care.
Good night. Thank you.